Journal with a piece looking at whether or not DeepSeek sort of uncovers NVIDIA's liabilities.
Well, look, I think that there's a perception that more is less. More chips, more people who know how to use them, more out of China means less for NVIDIA. NVIDIA's been quiet. What they may have advised people, look, you can look at the CES post-interview, not good enough. I think people have decided that we had a rebound, but the reality is that the orders will decline. By the way, therefore, the power will decline because people are figuring out how to use more with less. And, David,
that's the negative thesis.
That's the big negative thesis.
Of course, we've been talking about it since Monday.
Well,
yeah.
I'm just kind of going it over with people.
Okay.
But ASMLF does not say good things. It says bad things, because what it says is, look, there's a lot of equipment being used. The more equipment they use, again, we have more is less. So the whole world is kind of coalescing upon the idea that NVIDIA is not as special as we thought. And that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, what does that result in, Jim? Because we've all been having conversations these last few days with as many people who make decisions about what to buy and sell in terms of this area. And the one thing I've heard is maybe it's the out years. Maybe the multiple simply comes down because there is more uncertainty in the name.
Look, I watched Brad Gerstner yesterday. I mean, there's a sense that the multiple has become very low. So it's actually one of the lowest. And Michael Semple said
Brad's undeterred, by the way. He's a big believer in the overall growth not being in any way impacted. You know,
but if you don't,
accelerated compute is the present and it's the future.
Yes, it is. And I would tell you they still have a tremendous lead. Is China an existential threat to them? What China says is that maybe you should pause. But I want to come back and say something that I think that people should remember. If Larry Ellison and Mark Zuckerberg and presumably Elon Musk were all buying the highest end chips, did they not have knowledge about what was going on in China? I think that's fanciful. I think they had tremendous knowledge.
I think they knew. I agree with you. And by the way, I mean, there were the way this news played out is puzzling to some because there were plenty of people who were aware of DeepSeek's not just its aspirations, but its accomplishments previously with the previously released models. And so they had to have been aware of this. Yes. And so when you look at Zuckerberg spending $60 to $65 billion, the announcement obviously just on Friday. You look at the Stargate announcement from last week, or Nadella affirming $80 billion, and everybody else. They had to know, Jim. Yeah, and they were undeterred at this point. But everybody's looking everywhere for signs, right? Even Owens Corning, which provides fiber into data centers, I think was a positive read this morning. People are always looking for affirmation.
Right. I think that we're all kind of used to the greatness of Jensen Huang and NVIDIA. I mean, Carl, the most substantive thing that people are hanging their hat on is that all of these customers were mesmerized by President Trump and felt that they have to order. Now, that's almost conspiratorial. I think that they have more in mind than just doing Chat GPT in an advanced way. If that's the case, then these companies in China, they have figured out how to do the lower end. I think Jensen would say, well, that's terrific. What we're on is a very different plane. We've left that behind. We're not about asking them about why did Brinker have a good quarter? Is Starbucks coming back? Did T-Mobile take share? That's already in the Industrial Revolution. That's the cotton gin. I mean, he's talking about making the sewing machine. And I think that people don't realize that he is a visionary and he is well ahead of everything we're talking about.
So you don't think there's downside to at least the margins?
I do think that there will be, and I think that's why you're seeing some compression. But until someone actually has a better chip, an actual better chip, and there we have to see Amazon. And Amazon's going to report. Amazon is the one that is really rival. I was surprised that Advanced Micro actually went down because people feel, hey, listen, if this stuff is so easy, let's put it on AMD. But I think that a lot of that was...
You can start using AMD chips because you don't need all the compute power of the highest GPUs from NVIDIA, but I don't know.
I would love to see Lisa Su talk about it. You know, we're in quiet period for everybody. You can't get the stuff that you like.
We're going to get certainly plenty of questions about it on all the calls that are yet to come.
Right.
Whether it's Meta, Microsoft, and on from there.
It is the theme of the moment because some people saw it coming and yet they still ordered. That would be the Zuckerberg case, maybe the Musk piece. And then other people just said, oh my, what am I in? I'm going to go buy a double short NVIDIA. And then there are other people who think it's a hand cream.
Well, there's another way to view it, which is that the DeepSeek's accomplishments, and by the way, Alibaba today as well.
I know.
This model, people, again, were aware of this. This is something we'd been told some time ago, but they, released a new upgraded AI model that they say surpasses DeepSeek's V3. All of it, though, could point to sort of that exponential change that we fail to appreciate sometimes, because it sometimes just can't quite rattle around in some people's brains in terms of how quickly things can move. It was only a couple of months ago we were worrying that these models were running out of things to train on, that they were not progressing as quickly as previously.
No one's talking about scaling walls anymore.
No more. And in fact, you're suddenly seeing these efficiencies that have been added, these techniques that are different, open source, so available to all. And it does bring up the idea that there could be even more change more quickly.
No, I mean, but
even more compute power potentially needed.
Right, but the more is less means that maybe the monopoly rent that people feel that NVIDIA was charging is gone. There's also frankly, we had GE Vernova yesterday. The idea that maybe this whole concept of more power is ridiculous. I had Rusty Brazil on, he's my guy, RBN Energy, who's saying, are you kidding me? I mean, you really think that all these plants are going to be built? I'm waiting to see. I think the test would be, is 3 Mile Island not going to be reopened? That would be one that I need to hear. And secondarily, I need to hear that there are any order pullback. And I have not heard that yet, but that's not necessarily what people are going to announce. That they listen, I've decided if this thing only needs 1/10 of the power, 1/10 of the compute, well, I'm going to cut my orders by 9/10. I've not heard that yet, but this thing is a steamroller.
The majority of the models are American models, but here we see now the Chinese also coming in with not only an aggressive, competitive model, but one that's cheaper and lower cost. So it just gives everybody the motivation to keep going and going faster.
Well, I mean, what that says to me is that NVIDIA has to come out and either say democratization is terrific, but we're really on another plane doing different things, or NVIDIA can say, you know what, we got to work harder because the other guys have something we don't. If he says the latter, then the multiple will shrink. If he says the former, then the multiple could grow and we would regain higher.
Haven't heard from Jensen yet, at least not publicly. The earnings are not for a little while. Jevons paradox, though, people still want to talk about it. I know.
Well, you know,
I'm an expert, by the way, now in the 1865 economists in Great Britain and all the things he thought about the coal industry. When you said that the first time I thought about it, I was thinking maybe he's thinking that Devon Energy is going to get a takeover. But that is widely thought. You thought when I said Jevon? Yeah. Some of his friends called him Yevon. Some called him Levon, but I went with Jevon.
You look at the declines, for example, in NVIDIA and Broadcom. Micron's down a ton again. This week, I should say, both those stocks are down double-digit percentage points. Is that this is only going to lead to more consumption, more chips, not less. But as an NVIDIA shareholder, as that stock was up quite nicely yesterday, giving half of it back again today, that's where the real questions still lie. And it relates exactly to what Steve was talking about with Microsoft and what we talked about with Meta. Any suggestion whatsoever about a reassessment of spend, you're going to look right at that stock and 100%. See the impact.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the things as I've kind of reviewing the news with DeepSeek over the weekend, obviously costs are undeniable. The cost to build out this large language model that they did was obviously far cheaper than what the cost of to buy an NVIDIA chip. But the other thing that I think is somewhat debatable is performance, right? What is the real performance? Only enterprise and only consumers can make that determination. So for me, as I look to NVIDIA and I look to NVIDIA earnings towards the several weeks from now, yes, I mean, all beltways have led back to NVIDIA, and now this is a complete reset. We've heard from other players, ASML, obviously, as an example, talking about this is only going to spur demand. We'll see. I do think it's going to be a reset, but I do think they have the most important chips at play for this AI revolution. But it is somewhat of a reset, and I think that's good.
Evercore's, defending all this today. They call it generally a buying opportunity.
But NVIDIA, this was inevitable, and it's always been part of my thesis and why I don't have a big position, regrettably, because I would have made a lot more money in the stock. But part of that $80 billion in CapEx that we're hearing, the $65 billion in CapEx, I'm guessing, unless it's somewhere else, going to be somewhere else in your income statement, is going to develop of competing chips and cheaper ways to build out their AI capabilities. So it's no surprise. The only surprise with NVIDIA is the timing, because they were not going to be the first semiconductor company in the history of the world to maintain a technology lead forever.
No, but of course not. But the speed in which we are asking this new question is largely unprecedented.
Well,
right?
But the price at which the stock was selling implied that the monopoly could go on for a very long time, which is why we didn't own NVIDIA. And, maybe
well, you missed a lot. You missed a lot.
I understand that.
There's another.
Also, reports out of Bloomberg that the government may also be working on tighter export controls for NVIDIA chips. You see those shares moving down to session lows, just a little bit more than they had been, but enough probably to put some further pressure across the whole markets. Remember, NVIDIA's sales of chips to China specifically are a big question mark for analysts who are trying to figure out what its revenue and earnings exposure are going to be in the next couple of quarters. They were able to kind of thread the needle on export controls earlier. That's in part how DeepSeek was able to still use those chips to create its latest large language models. If there is a further tightening, though, that would certainly be a business headwind for them. Let me just sneak in a quick mention then while we have you about NVIDIA. So again, would it represent a big earnings revenue headwind for them if the government clamps down further on their China sales?
Yes and no. I mean, remember, we've done the calculus on China and NVIDIA and what it's meant and where those export controls already were an impact. I think the bigger issue is I wouldn't say it's existential, but what we had with DeepSeek over the last few days is one where are your biggest customers, has everybody overspent for CapEx, et cetera. That's the story with NVIDIA. It's less to me about export controls in China. I'm sure the company's going to say and do and feel that they want to do everything that's on the right side of that. I'm less worried about that.
All right, let's get to NVIDIA here. Interesting move in NVIDIA, down 4% today in the regular trading session. Up, though, after hours. Bloomberg reporting the White House is considering tighter curbs on its sales to China. Megan Casella's got the details here. Megan.
Melissa, that's right. So that Bloomberg report says that Trump officials are having what they called early conversations about putting additional restrictions on NVIDIA's chip sales to China, and specifically focused on the H20 chips. These are those scaled down AI chips that had initially been designed to get around current U.S. export controls on NVIDIA's sales to China. The company saying in a statement this afternoon that the Biden administration's thresholds, they say, had been set on performance levels reached 5 years ago, and that it's ready now to work with the administration as it pursues its own approach to AI. Now, the White House and Commerce Department did not respond to my request for comment on that report, but I would caution that it's very early for any decisions on export control policy. No one is yet leading the Commerce Department or even the Export Controls Office within Commerce for the administration. So we're in very early stages here. I will add, though, Commerce Secretary nominee Howard Lutnick did today say in his confirmation hearing that he will be very strong and rigorous in his approach to export restrictions toward China in order to ensure that the U.S. remains a leader on AI. So it could suggest that this type of policy will be supported moving forward.
Hey, Gene, you just mentioned, it's NVIDIA being a beneficiary of all this. We know that, right? So a couple weeks ago, Microsoft, Meta, they gave their CapEx guidance for the year. So here we are, they're reiterating it. And, let's see how this stock, how far it could run a little bit if it could fill in that gap from Monday. But, going back and looking at that chart over the last 3 years since it really took off, there's not a single gap to the downside. There's plenty to the upside. So I guess the question here is it going to be enough as far as this guidance is concerned, given the headwinds that we might be seeing around the globe with some of these open source models out of China? Like, is there a chance that the trade is just done for a bit?
This is specific to NVIDIA, or the NVIDIA, maybe the broader AI trade. I think, again, we're piecing together data points real time. That's what happened with DeepSeek, because it was one data point and the market had to extrapolate it I think, out to several years. Now, since then, we've had some more data points. And like you said, with NVIDIA and their business, and I think the bottom line is this, is that if CapEx infrastructure continues to remain strong, we're going to see models, even if they're novel models like we saw from DeepSeek that can be produced at lower prices, they're still going to want to build the infrastructure to get those models out faster. So if we continue to see that, I think that this is that build out, which is what we're hearing tonight from Zuckerberg. If we continue to see that, I think that not only will the hardware spend more broadly continue, but I think that the software piece is going to start to play out. And so I think that this broader AI trade is still very intact.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P finished the day nearly half of 1% lower, and NVIDIA finished the day about 4% lower. NVIDIA initially traded slightly higher in after-hours trading as Microsoft and Meta reiterated their commitments to their CapEx plans for this year. But then Microsoft CFO said that the fiscal year 2026 CapEx growth rate will be less than that of fiscal year 2025. Please hear me well right now. She did not say that CapEx would be less. Rather, she said that the growth rate of CapEx would be less, and that caused NVIDIA to trade slightly lower in after-hours. But then Microsoft CFO said something very encouraging. She said that the mix of CapEx spend will begin to shift back to short-lived assets in fiscal year 2026. The short-lived assets she's talking about are things inside of the data center such as CPUs and GPUs, which NVIDIA sells. She later clarified these comments further and basically said that CapEx growth will be lower because Microsoft had to spend a lot of money up front on things like space and utilities to construct and power the data centers. But in fiscal year 26 CapEx, spending will begin to shift away from those upfront construction costs and shift more towards short-lived assets such as CPUs and GPUs inside of the data centers. That is very good news for NVIDIA. And so I want to make sure you understand this clearly because you're probably going to hear a lot of doom and panic tomorrow in the financial media about Microsoft's CapEx growth rate slowing in fiscal 2026. But you have to remember that the CapEx growth rate will be less in 2026 because Microsoft had to spend a lot of money up front on things like construction and utilities for the data centers. And in fiscal 2026, that spending will begin to shift back to assets inside the data centers such as CPUs and GPUs, which is great for NVIDIA. In other news, there were reports today that the administration is considering tighter export restrictions on NVIDIA chips to China following news of DeepSeek. We'll see what happens with this situation in the days ahead. Even if more export restrictions are put into place, I think NVIDIA will be fine because there are many other companies outside of China who are waiting to get whatever they can from NVIDIA right now. Very briefly, I want to reiterate my thoughts on DeepSeek. I'm still not convinced that all of the claims we've been told about DeepSeek are true. I find it very hard to believe that a team built an LLM comparable to the top LLMs in the US with only a $6 million budget and old NVIDIA hardware. I think DeepSeek most likely had a much larger budget than $6 million. And I think it is also likely that DeepSeek has tens of thousands of NVIDIA H100s, but they can't say anything publicly about that because they're not supposed to have those chips under the current export restrictions. If DeepSeek does indeed have tens of thousands of NVIDIA H100s, which I think they do, then that would mean that the recent downward price action in NVIDIA stock because of DeepSeek is just a bunch of unjustified panic about nothing. And in case you've missed the videos I've been posting this week about NVIDIA and DeepSeek, let me once again share this short clip of Scale AI CEO from this past Friday.
You know, the Chinese labs, they have more H100s than people think. You know, and these are the highest powered NVIDIA chips that they were not supposed to have. Yes. My understanding is that DeepSeek has about 50,000 H100s, which they can't talk about, obviously, because it is against the export controls that the United States has put in place. And I think it is true that, I think they have more chips than other people expect, but also on a go-forward basis, they are going to be limited by the chip controls and the export controls that we have in place.
Again, if DeepSeek has tens of thousands of NVIDIA H100s, then the recent sell-off in NVIDIA stock is an overreaction and unjustified, in my opinion. Looking ahead, we have NVIDIA earnings on February 26th, and then NVIDIA's GTC on March 17th through the 21st. I expect GTC to be more of a market-moving event than CES was. CES was geared mainly toward consumers, whereas GTC is where we are likely to hear news about NVIDIA in the data center, which is where NVIDIA makes the majority of their revenue. Hopefully we'll hear more about Rubin and maybe even the next generation after Rubin. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.